Real quick, this video and others like it wouldn't be possible without the support of Patreon. If you like this video and want to support the channel, the Patreon link is in the description. In addition to monthly video essays, I offer Patreon exclusive rough cuts of longer video essays in the works. Thank you to all viewers for your support, and I hope you enjoy the video. This is Cow Tools. Cow Tools was made by Gary Larson as part of his long-running comic strip The Far Side. Cow Tools has a strange legacy, effectively developing a cult following among fans of The Far Side for its obtuse and hard-to-decipher nature. Cow Tools is, in my opinion, one of the great works of art of the 20th century. It's the kind of thing that belongs in a museum. It's what I like to call an accidental masterpiece, a work of art that touches on something much more profound and resonant than the creator ever intended or even could have expected. Gary Larson was just making another Far Side comic, same as any other, when he made Cow Tools. But the reaction to Cow Tools has suggested that it's not the same as any other Far Side comic. It makes people feel things. It makes people think things that they wouldn't expect from a newspaper comic. And that's a testament to its power as a piece of art. We're going to go some weird places with this one, because Cow Tools is a weird comic, and making sense of what makes it so unique and resonant isn't easy. It requires making sense of underlying realities about art that we tend to only recognize subconsciously. Cow Tools is, in essence, the first internet meme. It predates the internet, and its relevance as an internet meme is somewhat new, but this comic, accidentally, predicted a future in which art, and especially humor, becomes so postmodern as to collapse in on itself and produce an anomalous state in which nothing makes sense, but in which nothing has to, where art somehow is capable of being an expression without communication. Cow Tools, and The Far Side in general, can actually help us understand a lot about the cultural landscape we see online today. I wouldn't say that The Far Side is responsible for how we communicate online or what younger people find funny, but it certainly shares a lot in common with what the internet would become. And that's why, eventually, when Cow Tools became an actual internet meme, it did so in a way that was unique, far different from most internet memes. We'll discuss all of this and more, but first, we need to look at The Far Side. The Far Side is what one might call low art. It's not particularly deep, it's intentionally disposable both emotionally and even literally. The Far Side is a single-panel comic strip that's published in various newspapers, sharing the same creative space as Dilbert, Garfield, and Calvin and Hobbes. I was actually a fan of all of these comics growing up, reading them in compilation books, and yet the only books I ended up keeping long-term were the Far Side compilations. The Far Side stands out as a particularly different kind of comic. Most newspaper comics have the following qualities. 1. They have a unified cast of characters and a unified setting that they take place in. 2. They have multiple panels indicating a progression in time, usually with the joke being a punchline added in the final panel and the rest of the comic setting up said punchline. 3. They alternate between self-contained stories that exist within one strip of the comic and then longer-running stories that will progress the narrative through a series of a few strips at a time, maybe lasting about a week or maybe a few weeks. The Far Side doesn't really have these qualities. There are other single-panel comics such as Dennis the Menace and Heathcliff, but these comics usually have a unified setting and cast of characters that become part of their appeal. The Far Side is a very different comic by virtue of the fact that there is no consistency in the comic's world or characters. There are no evolving storylines, and usually there isn't even a time progression within the comic. Instead, The Far Side consists of an unrelated series of singular jokes portrayed via suspended moments in time. But The Far Side still has an unspoken universe that it exists in. That universe is the universe of Gary Larson's mind. Basically, rather than unifying itself via a storyline or a cast of characters, what unifies Far Side comics is that they all follow a basic governing logic based on Gary Larson's sense of humor. Larson's humor is defined by an exploration of the weird. More specifically, Larson presents in The Far Side a perspective that's fascinated by how slight changes to our reality can result in absurdity. And those slight changes are presented as a series of hypotheticals. The Far Side is, in this sense, a universe of hypotheticals. There is no one unique thing that Larson does, but the most common trope in Larson's comics is to take something that is almost universally known and understood, particularly in Western culture and from a largely US perspective, and invert it in a humorous way. This manifests often in a series of what-ifs, and can generally be categorized into two variations on this basic theme. What if the other was like us, and what if we were like the other? I'm using the other here as a catch-all for anything besides the default perspective largely shared by most people in the world. For example, humans are not animals, making animals the other. Larson will often make comics based on premises such as, what if humans were slightly more like animals, or what if animals were slightly more like us? The result are these little stories that are usually only mildly entertaining. If dogs had a civilization like ours, then they would do all the things we do, but they would still poke their head out of the window of the car to smell things. Most Far Side comics fall into similar themes. What if hell was more like Earth? What if God was more like humans? What if aliens were more like humans? What if humans were more like vampires? What if vampires were more like humans? These are all just silly pretenses for jokes that rely on almost universally understood concepts to make sense and be funny. If Larson references something too obscure, then it loses its appeal, so it's important that he stays within basic ideas that people can understand in the 20th century and onward. Cars, boats, planes, heaven, hell, basic knowledge of history, etc. Part of what makes The Far Side compelling, and what makes it endure as still fun to read even decades later, is that it makes the familiar strange. Too familiar and it won't be funny, it'll just be mundane. Too strange and it won't be funny, it'll just be weird. The Far Side often operates as a series of absurd responses to a basic question. What if things were just a little bit different? And that is where it hits a stride of mildly funny comic ideas. What's interesting about this slight deviation from the norm is that it operates on two levels, both of which are more profound than a comic like The Far Side ever intended to be. Because by slightly changing what we know, it offers us insight into what we know that we might otherwise take for granted. I'm going to use the word portal a few times in this video, so I want to state up front that I'm using it in a figurative sense, as a means through which we can experience something in fiction that we can't experience in the real world necessarily. The Far Side's humor works so well because it offers us two experiences. One, The Far Side functions as a portal into the other. A comic about dogs allows us to understand something about what it's like to be a dog. And two, The Far Side functions as a portal back into our own world through the lens of the other. Just as a comic about dogs can allow us to understand dogs better, the contrast between dogs and humans, as presented in his comics, can allow us to understand ourselves better. The best Far Side comics are comics that touch on both simultaneously, that allow us to understand something about ourselves and something about experiences we don't have simultaneously. Let's look at an example. This comic features two minions of Satan and Hell. Hell is something a lot of people believe in, but Larson has always taken some lengths to sand off any specific religious undertones of hell, and instead presents it as an archetype, a stereotype even, just a series of images that we associate with the concept of an afterlife of eternal suffering. In this situation, the other is hell, but there's one guy who just isn't bothered by hell. This joke is one of my favorites in The Far Side because it's just really funny, the idea that there would be a guy who just likes hell. This provides us a view into the other. That to be a minion of Satan, there would have to be an element of performance. Your whole purpose in existence is to torture people who have been condemned, and that position is almost unfathomable. We, in our mundane human experience, can't comprehend what that would be like. By portraying the minions as ineffective torturers, the comic brings to them some humanity that allows us to empathize with their experience. We're able to get a glimpse of what it might be like to be in that position by creating a human quality to what otherwise might be a very inhuman experience. Basically, it takes being an overseer of eternal torture and makes it feel like being ineffective at work in a management position. Then, the portal back to our own world. The guy being completely unaffected by hell and even possibly enjoying the experience reminds us of an absurdity to the very concept of hell itself. What would it mean if you made it to hell and you simply didn't mind it that much? The joke, whether it means to or not, evokes the notion of workplace culture. Because torture becomes mundane, the mundane becomes torture. In other words, it makes one think of how we are impacted by labor in our own lives. Are we whistling while we work, or are we breaking down into agony? And then one can see how our own lives as workers resembles that of being tortured. The Far Side doesn't want to have any radical political or social messages, and this certainly doesn't convey any, but it allows readers an opportunity to think about our own reality as a mirror to this hypothetical hell scenario. If you give it some thought, you begin to tie the joke into your own life, drawing parallels between the gag and the comic and other people who are unaffected by circumstances that others might view as torturous. This isn't to say the comic is deep. The Far Side is low art. It's something you look at for a second, go, oh, I guess that's kind of funny, and then you throw out the newspaper that it came on. But unlike a lot of comic strips, it has developed a cult following of people who love it. I think a big part of the reason why is that its simple but unique approach to humor and world building allows people to latch onto it as a universe unto itself. It's not a universe of spatial or narrative cohesion, but of logical cohesion. Every time you read a Far Side comic, you expect it to have a certain logic to it of mild absurdity, of slight deviations from the norm that we're used to. And by doing it like this, it allows readers to exist in a unique headspace where the absurdity builds a vivid picture using still images and moments suspended in time. We get only a glimpse of the world in which dogs were like people, but it allows the reader the option to dream beyond the page into a whole host of other ways in which that dog society could be structured. It's the beginnings of a story that the reader tells in their own mind. That is how it functions as a portal into the other. It's these little creative exercises that readers explore as they read that, although disposable, are fascinating when taken back to back, as part of a compilation or a binge reading. The Far Side isolated as one panel is only mildly entertaining, but as a collective body of work, is endlessly compelling to people who like to imagine these absurd scenarios. The Far Side is at its best when it allows the viewer to ponder the world through new eyes, viewing the reality of others and our own reality through slight changes that highlight what makes our own world strange. The Far Side can especially work when it plays with norms that challenge our base assumptions of the world. What is the point of our social mores and folkways? Why do we do things the way we do them now? The Far Side can tell little stories that make us think that, actually, maybe the way we do things now is itself weird. The Far Side doesn't just make our world strange, it reveals our world to be strange. It would not be fair to say that while the best Far Side panels offer us a portal through which to escape our world into the perspective of others and then return back to our world with new thoughts about it, the worst Far Side panels do neither. That's not really the case. Not every Far Side panel is attempting to make the familiar strange or to amuse us with absurd takes on cliches that we're all well familiar with. Sometimes, the Far Side is just straight ideas that Gary Larson thought would be funny, and some of those can be very funny in their own right. But while the best Far Side comics typically create a whole world of oddness that we can reflect on, there are some that fail in this attempt. The most obvious example of this is Tethercat. Tethercat is one of Larson's most controversial comics because it does attempt to make a slight change to our world to make it strange. In this case, it's what if animals were like people? And in this comic, it's two dogs playing a game of tetherball, but instead of a ball, it's a cat. Larson admitted that this comic was a failure, and for a simple reason. Because it is a single frame suspended in time, the story begins and ends with two dogs basically torturing a cat for their own amusement. Dogs would do this, but it breaks the sense of social ethics that anthropomorphizing dogs evokes. People look at this and see dogs not just torturing a cat, but torturing a cat forever, unceasingly. They will always be playing a game of Tethercat. Consequently, it seems really dark and cruel in a way which Larson never intended. This is an example where Larson tried to offer us a portal into the lives of dogs, but inadvertently gave us a nasty portal into the lives of people. Torturing something for fun is fun when you're a wild animal, but when you're a human being, it's disturbing. And by making dogs act a little like people, it highlights how disturbing animal behavior can be, and also how disturbing human behavior can be. Tethercat doesn't fail because it doesn't say anything about the world. It fails because it says things about the world that nobody wants to deal with when reading a funny newspaper comic. Cow Tools is unique, even among Far Side comics. Cow Tools' basic premise, at least as Larson conceived it, was to ask, what if cows were more like people? The result was that Larson started to think about what it would be like if cows were to make tools, the way that early humans might have. He thought it'd be funny if the cow was proud of tools she had made, but the tools were extremely basic and hard to make sense of. The joke of Cow Tools is that to the cow, she's doing something really impressive, but to us, it's not that impressive. It's only impressive to us that a cow could make something. But like when a dog might try to impress a human by finding random objects or rummaging through garbage to show us, it's the lack of skill or clear guiding logic that makes it amusing. Cow Tools was a failure. Objectively, Larson set out to make a comic that would make people mildly chuckle before moving on. But what makes Cow Tools so special is that it was a failure that resonated by being a failure. The joke was a little too obscure for people. If the caption had clarified that this cow is one of the first cows ever to try to invent tools, then that would make it more apparent what the joke was. But as it stands, Cow Tools feels less like a punchline and more like a title, like a clue as to what the actual image is trying to tell us. And the image itself is just a little too strange for people to make sense of. As such, rather than viewing it as an obvious joke, people tend to fall into two reactions. Either they view it as anti-humor, where the lack of a joke is the joke, or they view it as a puzzle to be solved, where understanding the cow, understanding the tools, trying to make a story out of the scenario in their mind, will reveal what's supposed to be happening and thus what's supposed to be funny. In the book The Prehistory of the Far Side, Larson reflected on the reaction to cow tools. The day after its release, my phone began to ring with inquiries from reporters and radio stations. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to know what in the world this cartoon meant. So, in summary, I drew a really weird, obtuse cartoon that no one understood and wasn't funny, and therefore I went on to even greater success and recognition. The reason why cow tools resonated so hard isn't because it failed to offer a portal into the lives of cows or a portal into our own lives through the lens of the experience of cows. It's the opposite. It's because it was a successful employment of Larson's formula that it was such a failure as a comic. It does offer us perspective on what it means to be a cow, and it does offer us perspective on what it means to be human. It's just that, while the comic begs us to view cows and view ourselves through the lens of slight changes to our world that reveal absurdities about it, what those absurdities are got lost in the comic itself. Instead, we look at it and we immediately identify that it's saying something about cows or something about us, but we have no clue what it's trying to say. And that's what caused people to obsess over it. People wrote to Larson demanding an explanation or offering theories. People thought it was deeper than them, that it was smarter, or alternatively, they thought it was meaningless and stupid and resented Larson for trying to outsmart them. But this was all an accident. Larson had no idea he was going to strike a nerve. Larson typically never struck a nerve with audiences, because he fine-tunes his comedy to be only mildly strange, but he barely reached over the tipping point of strangeness and fell off the cliff. It hit an uncanny valley of strangeness where rather than being so absurd that we can recognize it as meaningless, or being so comprehensible that we're comfortable in understanding the point being made, Cow Tools instead creates discomfort that the viewer has to resolve themselves, and never quite can. The comic simultaneously means nothing and everything. It's brilliant and stupid. It's bizarre and it's mundane. It destabilizes our entire understanding of art and begs us to reconsider our entire philosophy of how art ought to operate. We want the Far Side to be cheap, disposable, and only mildly entertaining. Cow Tools was that, but it was that in a way that, using the Far Side formula, touched on something much bigger. And what is that much bigger thing? Well, effectively, what Cow Tools touched on was the relationship that audiences have to what we consume. We want low art to be convenient, disposable, and able to be used for our own purposes. We want high art to be profound and culturally significant, to change the world, and make broader statements that might change our lives forever. And we don't want to blur the line between the two. Cow Tools wanted to be a monkey showing its butt. Instead, it ended up being the ending to 2001: A Space Odyssey. But in doing so as a Far Side comic, it caused the culture of newspaper comics to briefly go haywire because people were expecting disposable, but ended up getting something that they thought might somehow be profound. What made Cow Tools special is that it couldn't be categorized one way or another, which revealed something interesting about the Far Side on the whole, which is that it sits permanently on a fence between profound commentary and meaningless thought experiments. The Far Side is often trying to explore what makes our world strange, but it doesn't try to suggest change. It doesn't advocate for anything. It's not ever meant to be deep commentary or particularly meaningful, but it often borders on being so, because it plays around with our social and scientific realities in ways that can open up a bigger conversation than it ever intends. Cow Tools can open questions about what it means to be a human, what it means to feel separate from the animal kingdom, yet not ever truly be so. But doing so wouldn't be good for a disposable newspaper comic. So by provoking people to think more critically about newspaper comics, it reveals that low art isn't as disposable as it might seem at first. There is always a potential for deeper thought that can be provoked, even if there is not always a need for that provocation. So when it does happen, it makes us wonder why we see some art as disposable and why we seek comfort from low art, why we seek to not be tested and not be confused or impacted beyond the immediate consumption itself. If Cow Tools were made by Andy Warhol, it would be seen as a brilliant work of art. Instead, Cow Tools became a meme. At the heart of Cow Tools is a broader conversation about how information comes to exist. In 2023, we live in a world where the internet will forever permanently shape how we comprehend information of any kind. Fact, fiction, ideas, opinions, events, the internet becomes integrated into how we think and how we perceive all of it. As well, the internet has a large role in how these things are constructed. As such, for younger people, we can't imagine a world without the internet. For older people, many can't adapt to the world of the internet. This is, in part, responsible for how older people fall susceptible to predatory internet groups who try to manipulate them for financial or political gain. Because a lot of older people assume the internet will behave the same way that life before the internet behaved. Catfishing is something that an older person might not easily understand, but that young people just come to expect as a thing that could happen at any time online. Catfishing is an example of how an individual can manipulate information in the minds of others using their online presence. To convince someone that you're someone you're not is remarkably easy online, and thus, the internet plays a role in how that other person is manipulated into believing you are who you say you are. If I send a picture of someone who isn't me and claim it to be me, there are ways of proving this false, but if you take my word for it, only to find out later that you were wrong in your assumption, it becomes evident that the medium of the internet convinces you of a lie as though it were truth. This is what Baudrillard termed hyperreality, a state where what is true and what is not true can't be meaningfully distinguished from one another, where information has no obvious origin point that one can trace, where we can't ever truly know how we know what we know. While this lack of concreteness to information can for many people become destabilizing or threatening, it also has become a home for many, who actually get good use out of it. For example, trans people often gravitate to the internet because they can present themselves any way they want, so that, for example, a trans girl can present a feminine persona without having to have it be oriented around her physical looks or voice, but instead can present her ideal self. And this can be a safe place to explore transness for people without ever actually having to lie to anyone or threaten anyone. The internet also shapes art. Art online has less rules, because there is very little in the way of regulation compared to other mediums through which art is produced. This is part of why hip-hop has become the dominant genre in the era of the internet. Because hip-hop has a lower barrier to entry as far as the techniques of production, and relies often on references both in the rapping and in the production to other art, such as sampling or interpolations of other songs. The ease with which people can sample anything they want for use in a hip-hop beat means that a killer hip-hop beat can be made by anyone, at any time, and while there is skill necessary in making a great hip-hop beat or a great rap performance or lyrics, hip-hop is one of the genres best suited to thrive online. As far as the internet goes, memes are perhaps the lowest form of art. I don't mean low as in lesser, I mean low as in low culture, being easy to make, easy to distribute, and are largely disposable. And when I say disposable, I mean disposable intentionally. Very rarely do people make memes to try to make the meme that will last into culture for 20 years. Instead, they're often just making throwaway one-off gags to entertain friends or followers, without regard for what might happen with said meme once it's reached its target audience. A lot of the time, memes are iterations on unified ideas. A lot of memes are people taking a meme format or an image that is already well known and repurposing it for their own joke or statement. Meme formats come and go and oftentimes overlap with one another, where several meme formats can share the same basic idea. Memes, because they're so widely distributed and so easy to make, can often go through millions of iterations in a short span of time. Someone can take a meme format and go meta, go anti-humor, go blunt social commentary, go serious, go political, go sexual, go any direction they want. And because there are almost no barriers as to what can be done with memes, memes can make any statement they want in any way. But typically, memes will follow a governing logic. The most popular memes tend to fall into a specific set of soft rules, and those soft rules, interestingly enough, greatly resemble the far side. Often, the kind of meme that is most likely to get made and resonate are memes with a single image and an accompanying caption or captions. The image implies a story but doesn't show a linear progression of time, instead flattening everything into an implication of something that came before. The image usually is used to comment on mundane aspects of our world in ways that reveal some absurdity about it. Memes are basically Far Side comics made by the common folk. Also, like the Far Side, memes exist in a universe of separate but adjacent logic to our own. Just like how the Far Side is unified by the thought experiments of what if our world were a little bit different, memes are governed usually according to a unified logic of the format. If we look, for example, at the Virgin Chad meme, that format is an excuse for people to make all sorts of different jokes about the dichotomies of people, but the governing logic is the dichotomy itself, the absurdity of the way people are via contrast between each other. The Virgin Chad meme, much like Far Side comics, is a portal into another world that also functions as a portal back into our own. One of my favorite examples is a Virgin Chad meme about urinal etiquette. The Virgin does what most men do, and the Chad does things that men would never do, and some things that may even be impossible to do. The basic joke of this meme is that there are some men who are particularly uncomfortable to be around in public restrooms. Men who make a mess of the urinal, or who talk to you when you feel uncomfortable because you want to just pee and get out of there, etc. The Chad is an absurd take on a very rare kind of person that exaggerates it to the point that nobody would ever behave this way. But what makes this meme work is that it allows us a small portal into the world of someone who would behave with wanton disregard for social norms, that then allows us a portal back into our own world and makes us think about why we structure our society the way we do. Why do we put urinals right next to each other with nothing to obstruct the line of sight so that we can do each other while peeing? Why do we experience discomfort in public restrooms? And why do we continue to put up with this discomfort? In this way, the comic functions identically to The Far Side. Rather than providing an answer for these questions about the oddities of our own world, it offers us just the revelation of the oddness itself. It is just a little thought experiment that gives us a chance to think about familiar aspects of our world in a new way. It's not trying to make a grand statement, just trying to make people laugh a little bit. Memes share that same curiosity of the world, that same governing logic of absurdity, and that same disposability that The Far Side has. The Far Side itself predicted memes, so then cow tools seems unnecessary in the discussion. But there's another side to memes, where memes start to get weird, where they break all common notions of comedy, storytelling, or art. So let's talk about Marquard Zuckerberg E. Marquard Zuckerberg E is a meme that became fairly popular a few years back. It was just complete nonsense on first sight, but there is some amount of explanation behind it. So let's break it down. Markiplier is a popular Let's Player on YouTube. Markiplier's name, of course, is Mark. Someone at some point decided to Photoshop his face onto Lord Farquaad from Shrek. I don't know who did this or why they did it, but it functions as a visual pun. Fark rhymes with Mark, so the meme functions as a portmanteau, or Marquad. Part of what makes this funny is just the absurdity of the connection itself, seeing a popular Let's Player's face photoshopped onto a silly cartoon character. But then it kept getting new iterations, until we landed at this image. Mark Zuckerberg's name is also Mark, so Marquard Zuckerberg is an additional visual pun. And by using a photo of Mark Zuckerberg at a court hearing, the seriousness of such a scenario is undermined by the Marquard Photoshop. Then, the part that is hardest to make sense of. The caption for this image is just a big letter E. Is Marquard Zuckerberg saying E at this court hearing? Is E a title, a description or viewpoint being articulated about the scenario, or is it a complete non sequitur? Was the E put there on purpose, or was it a typo that the author simply found funnier than what they initially meant to type? These questions can be asked a million different ways, but it doesn't matter. Marquard Zuckerberg E is not deep, nor does it intend to be. It's just nonsense, but it's actually remarkably similar to cow tools, because the layers of intention behind it give off the impression that there is supposed to be some meaning to this image. It begs the viewer to try to make sense of it, but doesn't give the viewer enough for it to ever make sense. And thus, it becomes this discomforting, uncanny valley of humor, where meaning collapses on itself. Does it mean anything? Does it mean nothing? Does meaning nothing mean something, or does it mean nothing? And does meaning anything make its meaning more worthwhile than if it meant nothing? Does having an answer to the puzzle of this image satisfy any more than just accepting that it's meaningless? Marquard Zuckerberg E can cause the exact same split perspectives that cow tools did back before the internet. Some people might see it as a puzzle to solve, something that has to make sense somehow, while others might see it as completely meaningless trash and reject the idea that it could be saying anything. But it's clear that there's an intentionality. It's not AI art, it's not a natural rock formation. Someone made it, and there is enough information in it, such as the multiple visual puns, that make the viewer not feel content to say that it has no meaning at all. And like cow tools, any slight change could cause it to no longer hit this delicate balance. If the caption were anything other than just the letter E, if it were a phrase or a quote or a description, then we would be comfortable understanding exactly the point of this. But instead, Marquard Zuckerberg E rejects all attempts at deciphering meaning, and thus, like cow tools, it becomes simultaneously cheap crap and also something that provokes endless thought. The difference between Marquard Zuckerberg E and cow tools is that Marquard Zuckerberg E hits that uncanny valley of humor intentionally. It is intentionally head-scratching and causes confusion. Part of what makes it funny is when people who don't get it react to it, and so part of the fun of it is to use it effectively to prank people by making them feel like they need to get it when there's really nothing to get. Cow Tools is fascinating because it predicted a future in which meaning was secondary to content, in which the image was more important than its implications, and in which all roads led back to non-answers except to just accept that ambiguity is not something that can always be resolved. Younger people are more comfortable in that absurdity, where they can look at a meme that on the surface seems to have no meaning at all and find it funny without having to look for it to have meaning, where they can laugh at things that they don't even understand. A small child will laugh at a joke even when they don't understand it simply because they know that they are being told a joke. The format of a joke conveys the idea of humor so effectively that as a child, one can't distinguish between format and content. You can tell a kid a knock-knock joke, and they'll laugh even if they don't understand half the words being said. Memes can function in a similar way, but among people far older than the age of 5. Teenagers and even young adults can react to the idea of humor without needing to actually decipher it. And this isn't to say that young people are stupid, far from it. In fact, it's to say that humor is simply sped up as a process, where people are so used to the format of memes as jokes that they instinctively find amusement in it before they even comprehend it. For example, if a friend sends you a meme in a DM, you might like their message or the meme before you've even looked at it or comprehended the joke. This isn't because you're dumb, but because you want to convey to your friend a few things simultaneously. 1, that you saw that they sent you something. 2, that you appreciate that they sent you something they thought you would find funny. And 3, that you found it funny yourself. People become so quick to reaction times with memes that they can actually express, with a lot of nuance, before they've even communicated. When someone sends me something I'll find funny, I look at it, not because I expect to find it funny, but because I expect my friend to understand something about me that will be revealed when I actually do engage with the thing they sent. But I don't have to engage with it before I indicate a positive reaction, because I'm telling my friend that I like that they expect me to find it funny, even before I actually delve into if I find it funny. This process of expression without communication is the function of art online for a lot of people. It's what Cow Tools predicted. A world where the format of meaning is a more advanced form of communication than the content of meaning. Where someone sending a link to a video tells you as much as the video itself. Or where a meme with no obvious point can be used in ways that allow people to understand one another without having to actually be able to put that understanding into words. In this way, young people and the meme culture that they're immersed in have weaponized the disposability of low art by creating something that is both disposable and provocative, that can cause an exaggerated reaction to something that's not that deep or interesting. It should go without saying that memes don't really belong in a museum, but in the hyper-reality of the internet, it has become apparent that museums are not meaningful the way that they attempt to be. Preserving and elevating art doesn't make it more important, it just makes it more inaccessible. The accessibility of memes are why they resonate so quickly and why so many of them can be made and evolve in such a quick amount of time. There are likely millions of individual comic strips published that nobody remembers and that have not lasted as a piece of cultural relevance. Cow Tools has. It survived the disposability of its format. It was preserved not by a museum or by gatekeepers of art, but by fans who recognized something of value in it that made it worth preserving. It survived the way that the best memes survive, through replication. Its disposability made it accessible, and its accessibility led to it being preserved not by quality, but by quantity, by people sharing it with others the way that we share memes. It is a meme. One that comes from well before the internet, but matches a lot of the realities that make memes what they are. It was a look into where the future of the internet and of everyday humor would head, and thus, it fits so well into the world of memes online. All of this is why, when I found out that Cow Tools was itself becoming a meme, it made total sense. Cow Tools was a meme already. It had all of the qualities of the contemporary absurdist culture of the internet. And just as Cow Tools evades meaning through its obtuse and hard to decipher nature, it became a great opportunity for people to remix Cow Tools into contemporary meme culture. Cow Tools memes are not massively popular. The Far Side has always been a bit of a cult classic more so than a cultural touchstone. Its equivalent in internet culture is less Gangnam Style and more Homestar Runner. When there are Cow Tools memes, they're often referencing the little insulated culture of Far Side fandom, where most people who get the joke of Cow Tools memes get that they're referencing a history of that particular comic as one that has confounded audiences who witnessed it at the time. Cow Tools memes function two ways. For people who know the Far Side and know the story of Cow Tools, it's a funny reference, but for people who don't know the Far Side or Cow Tools, it's almost a prank. It's a way of continuing Cow Tools' legacy of being confounding and demanding interpretation while providing nothing of substance. Cow Tools memes are, for those who don't know Cow Tools, effectively Cow Tools 2.0, forcing a new audience to experience the same frustration that initial readers did, as well as the same frustration brought on by memes such as Marquand Zuckerberg E. This is why Cow Tools can slot into any format of memes so easily, because memes often rely on obscure references, anti-humor, and self-defeating anti-climaxes, and Cow Tools serves as an immediate punchline that can accomplish all three of those simultaneously. It works so well as a punchline specifically because it will make those who don't know what it is go, "What?" while making those who do know laugh at the knowledge that those who don't get it won't know that there's nothing to get. Because Cow Tools is so meaningless, it also makes it malleable, where you can use it in any context and make something comedic out of it by playing into its obtuse nature. Cow Tools itself feels like a non sequitur, so it works great as a non sequitur. And like Cow Tools itself, Cow Tools memes are at their best when they dare the reader to make sense of it, but don't reward the reader for attempting to do so. Because that's what memes do. They reject the value of intrinsic meaning in favor of the value of extrinsic meaning. Or in other words, memes aren't about what the creator was trying to say, but what the person distributing the meme is trying to say to their audience. Cow Tools is at its funniest when you show it to someone who hasn't seen it, not when you see it for the first time. It's that daisy chain socialization that memes foster that Cow Tools fits so well into. Cow Tools is a transitional fossil of culture. It existed before the internet, but it shares a lot of traits with how information is conveyed and distributed online. It's the lowest of low art, a step away from a bazooka bubblegum comic, but low art is now more resonant and more culturally important than ever. It's part of a universe of shared information and perspective between its author and its fandom, much like how the internet exists in a constant state of in-jokes and references inside references. But most importantly, Cow Tools is somehow both universal and too obscure to appeal to anyone. It contains within it extremes that would seem mutually exclusive by nature in such a way that forces people to contend with those extremes and the process by which they get that way. The process by which we come to find things funny, or come to find things meaningful, or come to find things worth exploring, is a process that we don't fully understand but have developed a habit of doing anyways. Much like how the Far Side presses viewers to give thought to processes that we normally don't notice, Cow Tools presses viewers to give thought to the meta-processes of how we engage with information itself, and it does so in a way that is much more reflective of where the world would head 30 years down the line than it is of its era. Its qualities speak to changes in our culture that we haven't even really caught up to as a culture. It's the Marquand Zuckerberg E of yesteryear, and it belongs in a museum. Thanks for watching.